Today, we're really cutting through the noise to get into a source that fundamentally reshaped modern American Indian thought. And honestly, it remains vital for anyone looking into anti-colonial studies.
Absolutely.
We are cracking open Vine Deloria Jr.'s manifesto, Custer died for your sins. I mean, if you want a powerful insight into the legal, the psychological, the systemic mechanics of colonization in America, this is it.
It really is. The title itself is, well, deliberately provocative. A real entry point.
Definitely.
And Deloria, he wasn't just an academic. He was a historian, a legal scholar, yes, but also a former executive director of the National Congress of American Indians. He wrote this back in the late 60s.
Right, a key moment.
A moment of huge social upheaval in the U.S. And this book provided, well, it was then and still is, I think, a crucial indigenous roadmap. It's not just history.
No, it feels urgent.
It is urgent. He himself noted that so many of the attitudes, the structures he exposed back then, they're still rampant, still very much with us.
So, our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want a thorough examination of his critique. We're going to focus on, I think, 3 core challenges he lays out. First, this burden of unrealistic stereotypes, the whole idea of the unreal Indian. Second, the absolute catastrophe of broken treaties and the sort of colonial legal machine.
Yeah, the machinery of dispossession.
Exactly. And third, maybe the trickiest one, the damage done by the supposed friends and these paternalistic systems that claim they're helping.
Okay, so where do we start? I think you have to begin with Deloria's analogy for how Indians are perceived. It's foundational.
The weather analogy.
Yeah, the weather. He says Indians are like the weather. Everyone talks about the weather, right? They complain, they predict, maybe they have theories.
But nobody actually changes it.
Exactly. And in the same way, the American public thinks they know about Indians. They know what an Indian is, what should be done about the Indian problem, but it's all based on mythology, on historical fiction, really.
And he calls this transparency, right? This idea that the public thinks they can just see right through Native people.
Precisely. They've already decided what a real Indian is supposed to look like. You know the image.
Fierce, feathers, maybe grunting, stuck in the past.
Always historical, never contemporary. And if a modern Native person doesn't fit that mold,
Then they're not real. Or they have to constantly explain themselves against this fiction.
they're rendered transparent, like you said, because the public insists on seeing only the stereotype they brought with them. It's a huge psychological burden.
It's fascinating how he uses humor, though, to kind of cut through that, like the grunting thing.
Oh, yeah. The stereotype insists Indians grunt. But Deloria says, well, the only time a modern Indian grunts is maybe when they've had too much to eat.
Which, given the economics, isn't often.
Right. It's sharp, it's quick, and it dismisses the whole expectation. Humor isn't just relief, it's a tool, a political tool, even a survival tool.
And it counters that insistence on the mythological past, which
Yeah.
makes modern Native life seem, unreal, ahistorical.
Completely. Which makes things like history class feel so alienating for Native kids.
He tells that amazing story about the conference, the singing.
Oh, my country, 'tis of thee.
Yeah.
Yeah. They get to the line, land where our fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. And several of the Native people there just burst out laughing, genuinely laughing, because it hits them, wait a minute,
Our fathers died trying to stop the pilgrims.
trying to keep the pilgrims from stealing their land, or they died because the pilgrims killed them, thinking they were enemies or, agents of the devil. The national narrative just doesn't fit their reality at all.
So the American origin story itself kind of requires Native people to be either myths or obstacles that were overcome. That's the psychological setup.
And that's crucial for decolonial thought. Deloria is saying step 1, reject that imposed identity. Shatter the mirror that only shows the unreal Indian. You have to define the struggle on your own terms.
Okay, so that sets the stage, the psychological battleground. Now, let's move to the tangible stuff, the legal mechanisms, the broken promises. Deloria is emphatic that this isn't just about culture, it's about law and land.
Sovereignty, yeah. And the scale of the betrayal, you really have to grasp it. He points out the U.S. signed over 400 treaties with Indian nations
400.
and has yet to keep a single one. Not one. Think about that against all the U.S. rhetoric you hear.
Criticizing Russia, commitments in Vietnam, whatever the current thing is.
Exactly. Demanding other nations keep their word while its own foundation rests on systematically breaking treaties with sovereign nations right here. Deloria says, it'd take the most cynical world power another century to match the U.S. record on broken treaties.
Wow. Is there a specific example he uses to show this cynicism? Like how an old treaty gets broken for modern reasons.
The perfect and tragic example is the Pickering Treaty of 1794 with the Seneca Nation.
What are the oldest?
Right. Guaranteed the Senecas would never be disturbed on their land. Forever. But in the early 1960s, poof, gone, ignored, to build the Kinzua Dam.
Why there? Did it have to be there?
That's the point. The Seneca Nation offered an alternative site. They even did their own engineering study, said it would be cheaper, more efficient.
So why insist on the original site that violated the treaty?
The allegation, and Deloria lays it out, is that it wasn't about engineering, it was about politics. A small political favor.
A favor.
Apparently a deal to keep Pennsylvania delegates in line for John F. Kennedy at the 1960 Democratic Convention.
So a foundational treaty, centuries old, tossed aside for, what, convention votes?
That's the level of cynicism we're talking about. And this kind of systematic violation, it needed a legal justification, right? A framework.
Which brings us to the doctrine of discovery.
Exactly. Deloria points to this as the ideological root. It goes way back, 15th century papal bulls and all that.
How did that ancient doctrine end up in U.S. law and undermine sovereignty?
It was devastatingly effective. Basically, the doctrine said that when Christian European nations discovered lands inhabited by non-Christians, the indigenous people automatically lost their full sovereignty. Their equality among nations vanished.
So they couldn't act as fully independent nations anymore.
Right. Their rights were reduced to just the right of occupancy. They could live there, but they didn't hold full title. And crucially, they could only sell or cede that land to the discovering European power.
Which later became the United States.
Precisely. So recognizing Indians as human wasn't about morality. It was a legal prerequisite.
You had to acknowledge they were human so you could legally take their land rather than just conquer it by force.
That's the mechanism. Land acknowledgement becomes the tool for legal theft. Once you acknowledge them, then you assume they must think like you, want what you want, making it easy to plan their future for them.
And the biggest plan, the legislative attempt to force that assimilation, was the Dawes Act, right? The General Allotment Act of 1887.
Oh, yes. Congress's grand experiment in social engineering. The goal was explicit. Destroy tribalism. Destroy communal land ownership.
Now, by forcing the white model.
Exactly. Carve up the communally held reservation lands. Give individual plots allotments to families. The theory was, if you give an Indian private property, they'll magically become an individualistic farmer. They'll assimilate. The Indian problem solved.
But the reality, as Deloria shows, was disaster.
Total disaster. Definitely sped up integration, but only because it made it easier to steal the land legally.
How did they lose the land?
Many ways. Some sold their plots cheaply to speculators, maybe out of desperation or not understanding the system. Others lost it through complex property tax laws they couldn't navigate or afford.
Checkerboarding.
Right, checkerboarding. It fragmented reservations, made governance and jurisdiction a nightmare, and millions upon millions of acres passed out of native hands.
And Deloria notes who was pushing for this. It wasn't just politicians.
No. Religious groups were huge supporters. Churches, like the Episcopal Mission under Bishop Hare, really believed private property was essential for Christianizing people. Individual ownership was seen as like a moral step toward salvation.
So Deloria frames it as
a race, a contest between the stealers of land and the stealers of souls. And the land stealers won easily, he says. This whole legal erosion got cemented by the courts later on.
Right, the judicial betrayal. Lone Wolf v. Hitchcock, 1903.
That was the hammer blow. Lone Wolf, a Kiowa chief, sued because Congress decided to sell off tribal lands without the tribe's consent, violating a treaty.
And the Supreme Court sided with.
With Congress.
Yeah.
Decisively.
Right.
The court ruled that tribes didn't actually hold legally enforceable title to their land, just mere occupancy rights.
Mere occupancy. What does that mean, practically?
It means Congress has absolute power, plenary power, they call it, over Indian affairs, the only limit on Congress's power over tribes.
Its own conscience.
Its own sense of justice, as the court put it, which, as Deloria points out, is like putting the fox absolutely in charge of the chickens. It gutted the power to enforce treaties, made tribes legal wards, essentially beggars on their own land.
That legal powerlessness, that structural reality, it leads right into the institutions supposed to manage all this. And the policy you mentioned earlier, termination.
Yeah, termination.
Yeah.
Passed by Congress in '54. Deloria doesn't mince words. He calls it a war. A political, economic, cultural war against Indian communities.
Pushed by politicians who just wanted the Indian problem gone. Fast.
Under the guise of freeing Indians from federal control, sure. But the reality, as Deloria describes it, was like smallpox blankets all over again.
How so?
Because suddenly withdrawing federal services, healthcare, education, infrastructure support, flawed as they were, led to massive spikes in disease, poverty, cultural breakdown, total disintegration for many terminated tribes.
And the thinking behind it, the justification was weird.
Colonial absurdity is the only way to put it. You had congressmen like Arthur Watkins, E.Y. Berry, determined to just end it all.
And they looked for models in René Descartes and the Doomsday Survey from 1086.
I know, you have to just stop and think about that. The Doomsday Survey was William the Conqueror cataloging everything in England, land, animals, people, after he conquered it. Why? To tax it, to control it.
So 20th century U.S. politicians are using a medieval conquest survey as a model for dealing with sovereign tribes.
It perfectly illustrates the colonial mindset Deloria dissects. They needed a precedent for absolute control, for inventorying everything to prepare for complete allotment and dissolution. It's using ancient, totally irrelevant symbols to justify modern dispossession.
And the failure of termination, the Menominee case, really shows it.
Heartbreaking. Here's a tribe in Wisconsin doing relatively well financially, self-sufficient. They'd even fought off the Dawes Act allotment earlier.
But they got targeted anyway.
Yeah. And the government used coercion. They had won a big lawsuit against the U.S., owed millions in judgment funds. The government basically said, you don't accept termination, you don't get your money.
Wow. And the cost, the financial aspect is just bizarre.
Completely reveals the lie. Before termination, the feds spend about $50 a year per Menominee person on services. $50.
Okay.
But the cost, just to plan the termination, the bureaucracy needed to dismantle their tribal structure. By 1960, it was over $2.3 million.
Wait, they spent massively more money planning the destruction than they did supporting the tribe?
40 times more, nearly. It was never about saving money. It was about ending the legal relationship, ending the tribe as a political entity. Full stop.
And the language they used was just dripping with contempt. Watkins comparing them to refugee camps.
Yeah, like they were broken victims needing benevolent rescue, not a sovereign nation being destroyed. That paternalism, sometimes disguised as sympathy, leads us right to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA.
Deloria reframes the BIA, doesn't he? It's not just paternalistic.
He says it's better understood as fear-ridden. Fear is the driving force.
Fear of what? How does that cause paralysis?
Fear of making a mistake. Fear responsibility. Bureaucrats in the area offices, they don't want to trigger a congressional investigation or, God forbid, another task force report.
Ah, the dreaded task force report.
Right. So the easiest thing is to stamp disapproved or just stall. Kick decisions up to Washington.
And then the tribes, stuck, appeal to their congressman.
Who kicks it right back down to the area office. It's the circle of fear. A perfect loop of inaction. Nothing ever gets resolved.
And the task force reports themselves. They're a symbol of this.
The ultimate symbol of government waste in Indian affairs. Every few years, enough noise gets made, Congress demands a task force.
They always find the same things.
Every single time. Conclusion. Congress isn't spending enough money. Conclusion. Policy keeps changing. That's bad. Conclusion. We need self-help, but with adequate loan funds.
And then?
Then, Deloria jokes, the reports get filed away in some huge government warehouse built just for storing task force reports. Endless study, zero change.
Even the physical setup of the BIA contributes to this distance, right? The offices.
Oh, totally. They're scattered strategically, which usually means nowhere near many of the tribes they serve. Like the Phoenix office handling tribes way up in Utah and Nevada, 1,000 miles away.
Makes it impossible to just pop down to the office.
Exactly. It fosters dependency, kills collaboration. It's all part of the dysfunction.
Okay, so we've got the legal theft, the bureaucratic paralysis, but Deloria really saved some venom for the people who claim to be allies, the experts, the friends.
Oh, yeah. His critique of the intellectual community, especially anthropologists, is legendary. Scalpel sharp.
His basic point is they showed up late.
They showed up after the shooting stopped, after the tribes were pacified, put on reservations. It was safe then. They weren't dodging bullets. They were taking notes.
Which leads to that famous line, an Indian killed by an anthropologist.
Goes to the library. Yeah. It captures the profound disconnect. The focus is data extraction, cultural tidbits, not the living people or their problems.
And the cost of this useless knowledge for knowledge's sake, as he calls it.
Often astronomical, way more than any actual investment in the community being studied.
The $10 million anthropologist, Zora.
One academic spends nearly $10 million over 20 years studying a tribe of less than 1,000 people. Deloria just asked the obvious. Imagine if that $10 million went into infrastructure, businesses, schools.
There'd be no problems left to study.
Exactly. Academia becomes this extractive industry, almost needing the poverty and crisis to continue so it has something to analyze.
But it's not just wasted money, right?
Yeah.
The theories themselves cause harm.
Oh, absolutely. The academic framework becomes a new kind of prison, like defining Neo-Colonialism as warriors without weapons.
What did that theory do?
It took real problems, poverty, no jobs, bad schools, and reframed them as a cultural trait. Oh, the Oglalas aren't succeeding because they're still clinging to their warrior ways. They're too proud, too traditional to adapt.
So it blames the victim using a romanticized cultural explanation.
Perfectly put. Why expect them to want a business degree when, according to the PhDs, they're just waiting for the next wagon train? It's absurd. He also mentions that crazy credit proposal in '68.
Based on hoarded wealth from CCC camps.
Yeah. An idea lifted straight out of analyzing, like, 18th century England's Industrial Revolution, applied to a modern reservation. It shows how completely out of touch, how irrelevant these white intellectual models often are.
Just constant redefinition by outsiders. So what was Deloria's solution to stop this academic colonialism?
Simple and brilliant, really. Any academic wants to study your tribe, fine. Apply to the tribal council, and you have to pay into the tribal budget the same amount you plan to spend on your study.
Ooh, that changes things.
Makes them contribute.
Right.
Puts the tribe in control. Demands reciprocity, not just extraction. Stops them from being, as he put it, ideological vultures.
His critique extends to the religious side, too, the missionaries.
Yeah. He questions the motive. Was it really about conversion, or was it more like experimentation with a captive culture? A way for churches maybe losing influence in mainstream society to feel relevant again.
And the contradictions were stark.
You think about it, preaching peace and meekness to warriors who'd just been militarily crushed, and then you close the service singing, "Onward, Christian Soldier."
Mixed messages, to say the least.
Fundamentally contradictory. Plus, he points out the institutional racism within the churches themselves about ordaining Native people.
Why wouldn't they?
Two main fears, according to Deloria. One, the simple racist fear. What if an Indian priest ended up serving a white congregation? Unthinkable for many back then.
And the second, more theological.
Yeah, this is fascinating. The fear that if you translated complex Christian doctrines developed over centuries in Europe into a native language.
You'd lose the nuance. It wouldn't be the exact same doctrine.
Precisely. Risking theological impurity. So, preserving abstract doctrinal purity was more important than empowering actual native spiritual leaders.
So instead of ordaining locals,
they preferred sending white clergy misfits out to the missions, guys who maybe weren't cutting it in white parishes. The missions became essentially spiritual dumping grounds.
Wow. Okay, so that lays out the crushing weight of these external systems. Legal, bureaucratic, intellectual, religious. But Deloria's book isn't just critique. It's about resilience, agency, the path forward. And humor is key to that resilience.
Absolutely key. Humor is the cement, he says. It holds communities together, it's cultural survival, but it's also sharp social critique. You learn more about how Indians see the world from their jokes than from any government report.
And the number one target for jokes?
Has to be Custer. George Armstrong Custer. He's the ultimate symbol of white arrogance and failure. Deloria says there are probably more Custer jokes than there were soldiers at Little Bighorn.
And they unite everyone.
Even historic enemies. Because Custer represents that ugly American archetype, and laughing at his fate is a way of asserting survival and maybe cosmic justice.
Give us a classic.
Okay, well, Custer was well-dressed for the occasion.
Why?
He had an arrow shirt on. Or the other one. Custer bragged he could ride through the whole Sioux Nation with his cavalry, and he was half right. He made it halfway through.
Okay. And the jokes about the BIA.
Yeah.
They show that insider understanding of the system.
Oh, yeah. Like the one about BIA brains being the most expensive. Why? Because it takes so many of them to make an ounce. It's funny, but it's also a sharp critique of the perceived incompetence shared among those who have to deal with it.
And all this agency, this humor, boils down to a fundamental desire.
Just leave us alone. Remember Alex Chasing Haas' quote, Q. Just what do you Indians want? A leave us alone law. Autonomy. Cultural separateness.
Which brings us to maybe the most critical distinction Deloria makes, especially for decolonial theory. The difference between the Indian movement and the Black civil rights movement.
Crucial distinction. Because the strategies couldn't be the same. Why? Because the historical policies were opposites.
Oh, so?
White policy towards black people was systematic exclusion, treated like property, then denied access, social, political, economic. So the civil rights struggle was necessarily about gaining inclusion, access, socioeconomic mobility within the American system.
But for Indians, the policy was
Systematic forced inclusion, assimilation. Trying to erase the separate political identity turned the wild Indian into a imitation white man, a household pet. Allotment was part of that. Boarding schools were part of that.
So the Indian problem wasn't primarily about getting in.
No, it was and is primarily about land, resources, and fixing the broken legal relationship. It's about sovereignty, recognizing the nation-to-nation status that was violated.
So trying to frame the native struggle purely in terms of race or socioeconomics, like the civil rights movement, misses the fundamental point.
That's Deloria's argument. It accepts the colonizers' framing. The core issue is land and legal status, which is why he pushed for tribal nationalism using the tools available, even tools given by the colonizer.
Like the Indian Reorganization Act, the IRA constitutions and charters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The IRA in 1934 set up tribes like corporations with constitutions, business charters. At the time, many saw it as another assimilation tactic, but Deloria saw an opportunity.
How?
He had this amazing insight. He looked at modern corporate America and said, wait a minute, this looks tribal.
How is corporate life tribal?
Think about it. Corporate totems are trademarks. Big conventions are like powwows. Stock options are the new eagle feathers. The conglomerate provides identity, internal status, shared rituals, a sense of belonging separate from the outside world. He argued white society was unintentionally tribalizing itself.
Okay, that's a fascinating flip. So tribes could use that corporate structure
For their own ends, for governance, economic development, self-determination. It wasn't a purely alien white thing. It was a structure that could be adapted for tribal survival.
And the proof that tribal identity could survive, even surrounded by modern America, came from the Tiga story.
The Tiga tribe of El Paso, just incredible. They basically maintained their culture, their language, their social structure for centuries, right there in El Paso. Completely forgotten by the BIA, by the federal government.
Until they were rediscovered.
Rediscovered and formally recognized in 1968. And that discovery just shattered the whole melting pot idea.
Because if they could survive intact for 300 years inside a major city.
What did that mean for tribes on reservations? It meant survival was possible, indefinitely. It fundamentally shifted the goalposts for Native leaders.
From managing decline or assimilation
To planning for permanent existence, political survival, economic independence, cultural continuity. The goal became separatism, not integration.
And Deloria insisted the focus shouldn't just be economic equality. That's a distraction.
A distraction from the core legal fight, yes. Cultural separateness and political independence achieved through tribal self-governance, using tools like corporate structures. That's the aim. And the method has to be smart. Ideological leverage, not trying to beat the white man at his own game of violence. He reminds us, the U.S. wins wars, but it never wins the peace. Violence just creates more violence.
So the path is nonviolent, focused on self-definition and forcing that change in the legal relationship.
Exactly. Using the system's own logic, its own structures, against itself to achieve sovereignty.
Wow. Okay. This deep dive into Custer died for your sins really maps out that complex struggle. We've hit the need to reject the stereotype, the demand for legal justice for centuries of broken promises, and this idea of seizing sovereignty using modern tools.
And Deloria's final point, I think, is about what ultimately ensures survival. It's not perfect organization, not political power in the traditional sense.
What is it then?
It's that Indians are fundamentally a people, unified by shared humanity, history, and experience. They're not just a pressure group organized for conquest or gain. That shared identity is the bedrock.
So, thinking about our listeners, especially those interested in genuine anti-colonial work today, if the core conflict really is about land and legal status, not just race or culture, what does that demand?
That's the provocation, isn't it? It demands a shift from the white tendency to always define the Indian, define the problem, define the solution. The question becomes, when do you stop defining and start actually relating? Start honoring the relationship defined by treaties and inherent sovereignty.
What does that look like in practice?
It looks like what Alex Chasing Hawk asked for, a cultural leave-us-alone agreement, in spirit and in fact. It means stepping back from the constant urge to study, to manage, to help, to integrate. It means respecting boundaries, legal, cultural, political, that allow for tribal survival on their own terms. That's the real work of decolonization.